We're here with Jason Mills, a QuicksortRx pharmacist, who is going to tell us all we need to know about HRSA's recently proposed 340B Remodel pilot program. First question is just if someone were to be unaware of the implications of this proposal or how likely it is to come to fruition, how would you give them a summary?
Well, this proposal from HRSA is kind of getting us to a point we all saw coming with recent federal court cases demonstrating that HRSA has the ability to approve these rebate models. It was just the next step that HRSA was going to put together some type of a rebate proposal or open it up for some type of a rebate plan. And the only question that we had in the healthcare community was, when was that going to happen? So to anybody that doesn't know what's going on or kind of surprised, you're fine. It's good. There's a lot of people that didn't see this coming so quickly after those court cases. But in case you didn't even know that there were court cases going on, what you have to remember with the 340B program is that the statute, right, the law about the 340B program doesn't specifically spell out how those discounts from the 340B program are supposed to be recognized. And so the way the program started, based on the legislature that came out of the 90s up to now, it's always been a discount that was given to covered entities up front. Okay, so they didn't have to do anything on the back end. They just had to say, hey, we're eligible for a discount, and manufacturers were then expected to provide that discount to these hospitals. Well, up until recently, a couple of those manufacturers have challenged that model and have stipulated that it would actually be better for the program if those discounts were actually more recognized in the form of a rebate. So they execute a purchase of an item, and then they would have to claim some kind of eligibility for that discount. And then there's some process that is undertaken that determines whether or not it was actually true. And then a check gets written for the difference between what was paid and what the actual discounted price is. And so once that check comes across, that's your 340B program. That's the new model. That's what a lot of manufacturers proposed, but they didn't go through HRSA. They just kind of said, hey, this is what we're going to do. HRSA denied it. There's a couple of lawsuits. So the courts came down on the side of HRSA, but did keep the door open to say, hey, there could still be a rebate model. It just has to come from HRSA's office.
The 25 drugs, how did they pick what those are?
Well, it was 10. So they chose 10 drugs. But what they did was, and they actually say this in this announcement, is that they're just picking the 10 drugs that were already chosen from the Inflation Reduction Act that was signed into law during the Biden administration. And so what the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA, it gives Medicare the opportunity to negotiate prices with the drug manufacturers for those drugs. And it's going to be a new price point essentially established between CMS and the manufacturers. And my guess is that HRSA was like, well, since we're already going to be doing something with this piece of legislation with the IRA, let's go ahead and just include them in this potential rebate model pilot. Since there's going to be a lot of changes at the point of sale and at the counter anyway with regards to these medications, let's go ahead and just add one more layer of complexity in the rebate model. Now, I've got a lot of opinions about that on this selection, but I don't know if we really want to hear my opinions about it. But to my best guess, that's why they picked those 10, is because those 10 were already going to be front and center. And there was already going to be complex billing questions, rebate questions, checks going to covered entities and Medicaid and everything else. So I think they were just like, well, it's already going to be on fire. What's another log?
How likely do you think it is that this is going to go into effect?
Almost certainly. We've only gotten to this level of a proposal a few times with the 340B program, but nothing's really made it to this point without a significant argument, without a significant fight. And it's because it was never a pilot. This is the first time that we're hearing of a pilot in the 340B space. If you've been in the 340B space for about 10 years, you would remember things like the Mega Reg and the Mega Guidance, which came out in the mid-2010s. It kind of opened itself up for comment and everything else, and then it never saw the light of day. But that was because that was going to be a change that was across the entirety of the program. This is a groundbreaking for the Office of Pharmacy Affairs because we've never done a pilot before in the 340B space. So it's novel in that approach, and I like that. I would pick different drugs if it were me. But that's just my opinion. And we'll get to that in a second.
Why would you have chosen different drugs? What's wrong with these drugs? Do you feel like that's a question a lot of people have?
I think there's going to be the biggest issue, or once I heard that there was going to be an open comment period, one of the first things I started thinking about from a comment perspective is this isn't a true pilot. And the reason why is because the scope of those drugs, the reason why those drugs were chosen in the first place through the IRA is because the IRA had conditions that had to be met in order to make it into this top 10 category to give CMS the opportunity to negotiate. That's why those 10 were chosen, is because they had a massive amount of fills, huge volume, a ton of spend. All of them were the only brand. It was all brand only. So at the time these were chosen, it was only brand, no competitors, no generics. Well, surprise to nobody, most of these drugs are used almost exclusively in the outpatient space, like in the retail specialty environment. And you can see that, any pharmacist that's used to seeing those drugs would recognize where those drugs are in the community and realize this is a very narrow focus, because you're not looking at drugs that are really used in the hospital setting, like a traditional inpatient hospital setting with any of these drugs. And the same with infusion centers. So it kind of begs the question. It feels like we're only piloting drugs that might have 340B application in a retail environment. Okay. I mean, if that's what we're truly trying to pilot, then that's fine. But let's say that in the pilot. And if we're going to do something later to reflect more of the workflow that happens in the inpatient or home infusion space, that's fine. But the way that it's kind of being announced, or the way that it was put out there, was, hey, this is the pilot to test this. Well, you can look at the drugs and be like, well, this isn't a fair pilot because it's not looking at all the other places of therapy where 340B may become relevant. But if you look further in the notice, it even requests certain data elements to be submitted to validate the eligibility of these medications for be eligibility or not. And it's funny because if you look in those data points, it's almost exclusive to the retail environment. It asks for a fill number. That's something that's usually only represented on an actual label or a outpatient prescription box. And it also asks for the BIN and PCN, which are typical billing elements in a retail environment. So it's clear that this is a pilot. I get it, but it's only going to be a pilot in the retail space. And then my last little bit on this is that is also why I think it's a bad pilot choosing these 10 drugs. I get it. Those drugs are already going to be under a microscope, but I think that's why that's a problem. I could see some entities not even going the 340B route on many of these drugs and just say, you know what, we're not even going to get into 340B eligibility. We're just going to go with the negotiated price, and that's it. We're not going to play the 340B game with these 10 drugs. So I don't know that that's really going to be a good pilot, because you're already going to influence the outcome because of another program. So that's problem number one. And problem number two with those 10, there's already generics that have come out since those were chosen. So that's also going to cause an influence on some of those drugs. Stelara is one of those drugs. There's a biosimilar out in the market now, and I think it's Farxiga. And Xarelto and Entresto has some generics that have come out. So I don't know. I know why they chose them, but it's not my favorite.
What are the other areas outside of retail that 340B would be potentially applied to in the future?
Yeah, well, we're talking infusion centers, right? These are the type of outpatient, where you get in a chair and you get an infusion under healthcare providers' care. But then once you're done with your infusion, you walk right back out the door into the community. That is a classic 340B eligible encounter for the medication that just got infused into that patient. But the thing is that goes through in a completely different billing and charging insurance pathway than you do on the retail side. It's just completely different submissions. The remittance that comes back to it goes a different way. Insurance sees it as a different type of a billing entity. So it's just going to be different. And then same thing on the inpatient side. A lot of emergency room visits are classified as 340B eligible. And so it's just going to be different. And then same thing on the inpatient side. A lot of emergency room visits are classified as 340B eligible. And so it's just going to be different. And then same thing on the inpatient side. A lot of emergency room visits are classified as 340B eligible. be eligible encounters. So you have a lot of your traditional ER drugs which run a wide spectrum, right? Some are very urgent, very invasive. Others are more just the general stuff, like everybody gets an aspirin or something when they walk into an ER. But every single one of those would technically be eligible for 340B. And again, just like infusion, just like retail, the billing and the charging of those drugs goes in a completely different pathway. So in order to really get a good firm understanding of is a rebate model actually going to work, I think you need all of the different areas like we've just described a handful of to be represented. And you can do that by picking NDCs like they did with these IRA, but let's just point out it's deficient in that it's not going to be representative of the entirety of the 340B program.
It's really like a retail.
It's almost exclusively.
Yeah. Interesting. What would you tell someone should be their next steps? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, well, the first piece of advice I would have is let's worry about the things that we can know right now, and let's not worry about the things that we're still guessing at. And unfortunately, we're kind of getting this information in a trickle, but now with this new message from HRSA, we now have new information. So what we went ahead and did at Quicksort was we identified those 10 medications that were listed. Now, many of those medications come in very different versions, different strengths, iterations, and presentations. So once you actually break each of those up, you end up with actually quite a lengthy list of affected because each presentation has its own NDC. So each NDC is going to be affected by this potential pilot program. We have a list of NDCs. You can actually get it from the HRSA website. We've got it as well. And just grab that list of NDCs. And now you can at least understand what a rebate model would look like. Because what we've done is we've applied our rebate model exposure logic, which prior to this list coming out, again, we didn't know what was going to be targeted. So we could come up with a couple of different ways to come up with like a rebate exposure methodology. But now that we actually identified these NDCs, we just took these NDCs, ran it through the same process. So now what one of our customers can do is when they look at this report, they have a good understanding of here is the amount of money my hospital is going to be expected to spend or incur and kind of wait for that next check. Now, what we don't know is the time period it's going to take in order to take these medications, submit whatever you would need for this rebate model process, have that go through some kind of QA. It is noteworthy that the language within this memo does state that the manufacturers don't have the authority to appeal or deny. Now, if it has something to do with the actual manufactured, with the negotiated manufactured price, then they have the opportunity to appeal it. But if it's just a pure 340B, is it eligible? Is it not whacked at 340B? It appears based on this initial language that they won't have the ability to remove that eligibility. That is a question some covered entities had was like, well, what's the appeals process? Like, what if they just deny everything and they just, they don't give us any check? Well, it looks like HRSA is trying to build in some type of a method so that can't happen, but still kind of scratches the itch for the manufacturers and that it provides a level of transparency.
What should they do with that knowledge once they get it? Do they need to be bringing that to their CFOs? What should they do proactively once they have that data?
Well, sunlight's the best disinfectant, right? So that's why I'm saying just get the elements of what you know. Don't guess at this point. So what do we know now? Now we have a list of drugs and we also know what those current WAC and 340B numbers are. So we can provide what a potential rebate exposure would look like or how much we anticipate your organization would need to hold in arrears until they keep getting these rebate checks moving forward. That's a good data point, and I think that's probably what needs to go to the financial leadership of the organization and say, hey, we're keeping track of this a potential pilot program to go into effect today, for example. These are some of the financials that we would be exposed to. Now, if you're a good CFO or director of finance, then you're going to come up with these very simple questions. Well, like what period of time are we talking? How fast are these checks going to come in? And that's where you need to pump the brakes and say, nope, they're still building this plane while they're flying it. We don't know the answer to that question yet. It's multiple manufacturers. That might mean that these checks are not coming all in one big swoop. Some of them might do it by claim. Some of them might do it by week, by month, we just don't know yet. And that's what this pilot program is intending to do, because yes, while it's alerting us on the hospital side that there's a potential for a pilot program, it's also requiring the manufacturers to submit a plan. So remember, HRSA still has to approve whatever these manufacturers stand up. So right now, that's what the manufacturers are doing. They're trying to come up with some type of a methodology that HRSA will approve to push forward for a rebate model. Last thing I'll say about it, that same piece of paper also says one very key word: voluntary. There's nothing compelling the manufacturers of these 10 drugs to actually produce a pilot program. It's still voluntary. So while the product that we've put out there is all encompassing for the IRA, we still don't know which manufacturers are going to participate in it. And once we know that, then we'll continue to change the model. If we find out that for whatever reason, Pfizer is not going to participate or something, then we can remove those Pfizer NDCs from that calculation.
That's super helpful. Are there any questions you're getting from customers a lot that we haven't covered here?
Most of the questions that I'm getting from our customers are, have you heard anything new? Everybody seems to be getting information pretty quickly. I'm actually kind of impressed. We sit pretty close to the tip of the spear when it comes to information that comes through. And when it comes to this stuff, clearly people have their radar up and they're reading their news. The day that this was announced, I had 2 conversations with hospitals that day. Both of them had already read the memo, and some communication had already been submitted to their leadership. This is clearly something that people are really spending a lot of time on. So the questions are actually very good and sophisticated at this point. And yeah, they're just asking if we've heard anything that isn't out there. And they're all about the questions we just don't know yet. Like, what other companies are going to be there that are going to be a part of this approval process or submissions process? There's nothing to say that we couldn't do that. But yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Are you optimistic for what this means for the future of the program, or do you think it's a bureaucratic, unhelpful addition?
That's a great question. Okay, so this is more of a Jason Mills answer on this one. So I might have to take off my Quicksort badge. But so I'm actually I'm positive on the one element that I feel hospitals have always been challenged by with the 340B program, and that is, what are you actually doing with the savings that are generated from the 340B program? And if that is the big issue that's coming from manufacturers and lawmakers, then I'm on board. I think that their program was designed for hospitals to stretch those dollars. I think it's a responsibility of those hospitals to say, this is how we stretch those dollars. I think that it will aid in that transparency, because now there will be a check, right? A check that comes through. It's net new money. It's going to go into an account. And then that account is then going to need to be mapped or in some way, shape, or form able to be forensically examined. And I think that is a good thing, if that was what they were trying to do. If all they were trying to do was try to say that the 340B program is being vastly abused and these discounts aren't being really truly earned by these hospitals and covered entities, and they're trying to do this kind of gotcha methodology by engaging in this kind of approval process, then I don't think that's been the problem. There are way more good actors in the 340B space, far more than some of the bad actors in this space. And when I say bad actors, many of the times, there's nothing diabolical here. It wasn't some kind of scheme to get one over on the federal government or the manufacturers. Oftentimes, it's just a software setting, or somebody forgot this one drug requires this extra step, and it resulted in something. All of these are curative. All of these can be fixed and addressed. I don't think it's necessary to throw the program out completely. And so I'm okay with this. But since you asked my opinion, I'll add this last bit. If this doesn't get to the issue, like if this rebate model goes forward and all manufacturers participate in it, and 2 years from now, it's just the way the 340B program runs, okay, fine. But if there's still issues with the 340B program after this, then I think that's a pretty giant signal saying maybe we need to just re-examine the entire policy. And at that point, let's bring all the stakeholders in. Let's bring in the manufacturers, the hospitals, CMS, insurance companies, and let's start at the top. Like, who's eligible? What is it? What is a discount? Because at this point, it's getting so complicated. And now that we'll have 10 new drugs with 400 NDCs, going to be seeing a completely different price point. Oh, and by the way, 2027, 15 more drugs are going to be added. By the way, 2028, 15 more drugs are going to be added. So it's just going to keep getting more and more complicated. So if this provides a little bit of ease and it answers a big question and it makes it what I hope is a legitimate program legitimized in the eyes of its naysayers, then I'm all for it.
I love that. Thank you. This was so helpful for me too.